Welcome to the Business English Podcast, and do we have a top-tier, stellar episode in store for you today. Not only will we be dealing with what I consider to be the most vital aspect of business English, networking, but this episode actually forms part 2 of our 2-part series on this essential skill. You can find the first part to this episode over on the channel of my very special guest today. So if you haven't listened to the first part already, go and listen to the first bit. The link for the episode is in the show notes. And if you don't know who my special guest is today, all I can tell you is that he is affectionately known by some as the Podfather. Some say he's the reason the alphabet is in order and that his punctuation is considered art in 5 countries. Some say that his podcasts can be used to power a small city and that they are so enlightening that they've been declared a national treasure. Some say his pronunciation is so perfect the Oxford English Dictionary asks him for advice, and that his episodes are so clear they can be understood by dolphins. Some say he once taught Shakespeare to rap and that his favourite colour is the past perfect. Some say he once corrected the grammar of a silent film and that his voice is the reason audiobooks were invented. All we know is that he's called Luke from Luke's English Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Business English Podcast, helping professionals communicate more effectively, more confidently, and with impact. With your host, Rob. From Energetic English, let's get down to business. Ladies and gentlemen, as previously promised, we have the excellent Luke from Luke's English Podcast with me today on the show. Luke, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Rob. It's very nice to be talking to you. We just recorded part 1 of this conversation on my show. And so I'm happy to be talking again in part 2 here. We're going to continue talking about the same subject. Lots more to say.
Yeah, absolutely. If you haven't listened to that episode already, please go on to Luke's English Podcast and listen to the first part of the episode on networking. We covered some absolutely stellar stuff on there. Today, we will be continuing our discussion on networking. We're going to be touching on 3 points, crucially. Cultural conversational no-nos, which can always trip you up during a networking conversation. We'll look at how to grease the wheels and keep things going before finally wrapping up with if you do say anything wrong or you encounter some friction during a networking situation, how we can unpick that scenario. So I guess to start with, could you throw some light on anything that you would think is inappropriate for networking scenarios? What sort of subjects can you think of any?
I suppose there's the usual sort of taboo subjects that I think most people understand that you shouldn't really talk about, right? It's probably worth saying them anyway. I don't know who would talk about these. Borat is the sort of example of someone who would just decide to start talking about what he did in the toilet or something like that. But so obviously things like sex and bodily functions and stuff, for the most part, are probably not appropriate. But then you start to get into other subjects that could be less obvious whether they're okay or not. For example, politics and religion. Religion, I don't think people talk about it that much, but then in some situations you get into a situation where culture and religion are quite close. And so when you want to talk about someone's culture, you end up talking about their religion. You might end up in a sticky situation there. Politics is probably best avoided, and it's worth remembering that. We actually do forget that, because as a Brit living abroad, it's actually surprising the number of times people just openly ask me about Brexit. Brexit. People will just, I'll be teaching a class, like I remember one particular example just after the vote. I was teaching a class of students that I didn't know. I was covering for someone else. And I was teaching them fine, and the lesson went fine. At the end, one of them said, "But Luke, can we ask you, what do you think of Brexit?"
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh God, really? Oh, really? Don't go there. I didn't really mind, to be honest. I didn't mind that much, but it is an example of perhaps just a subject that could actually become quite touchy. And there's a lot of responsibility on me to then talk about that in a fairly balanced kind of way, or in the classics: religion, politics, sex, money as well. But again, it does depend on the culture a little bit. But I think for the most part, it's not really okay to just jump straight in and talk about how much money you earn and things like that. I don't think anyone really talks about that, do they? Maybe in the United States, it's not uncommon to be at a barbecue or something and to be standing around and you ask the host, "Hey, I really like your barbecue. Where did you get that?" And the host's like, "Oh, it just cost me $200 or whatever." Yeah. People will talk about how much things cost. Yeah. In France, where I live, we don't really talk about those things. No. Is that you've got to be very careful not to brag about how much money you earn, or that kind of status-oriented conversation is not really normally done. So money, sex, religion, politics, family.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, family. In certain cultures, definitely, I think that's a step too far. To your point about our dear American cousins, or even here in the UK, how's your brother getting on at university? Is your mum still living in Scotland? These are maybe questions of endearment if you do know the individual or you've had a previous networking conversation with them. Although you've really got to judge yourself whether asking how the other person's husband is or wife is, and read the room, judge the audience, and really get a feel for what may be inappropriate. And so this is why I think family falls into the sort of grey area. With a new individual you've just met at the coffee station, as we were talking about on your show, maybe not asking what their wife does and how their kids are, and it's very presumptuous, and you could land yourself in hot water, I believe.
Yeah. One way to judge this is to see what the other person is willing to share on their own, and then use that as a basis for, like, if they've offered it up as a subject in the past, then it might be something they'd be willing to talk about. Also, another thing is that I've noticed that what can work is, rather than asking someone about their own personal life too directly, what can work is that you share something about your own personal life instead. So say, I've got 2 kids and my son is only 9 months old and he still doesn't sleep through the night. So I have to say, I'm pretty tired today. I'm going to need a couple of coffees later. You share that about yourself, and then the other person might be a bit more willing to share similar information. Sharing first rather than investigating might be the way to do it.
I think, you're looking at that reciprocation, aren't you? If you've showed that it's a safe space for you, you're happy with it, I'm willing to talk about a few elements of my family. And I think that's a much easier way in, like you said, to your point. I've got 2 kids. They're keeping me up at the moment. Have you got any children? It's far less strange than just asking someone, so do you have children? It has a very different ring to it, I believe.
Yeah, I agree.
Brilliant. And the whole money situation, small talking about, or networking and asking somebody about this idea of how much you get paid or something like this, I really believe that this strays into the more prickly aspect of networking. But like you said about how much it's a really nice suit or something like that, you're leading in, you're walking up to the edge of the subject of they may disclose if it was expensive or not. That's their decision rather than yours. Yeah, another great point.
But I think complimenting people on things they have can be great. So I love that suit. That's a fantastic suit. If it is a fantastic suit. I mean, if it's just some, if it's just clearly some off the hook H&M thing, then maybe that might not be the right way to go. But if someone is if someone has clearly made an effort with the way they dress, you can say, "Oh, I love your cufflinks. Where did you get them?" That can be very flattering and very nice. And it's up to them whether they disclose how much they cost. And if they do, you don't go, "I'm terrible, I didn't mean to ask." You don't do that. You roll with it. If they say, "Oh yeah, I just got them in blah, blah, blah. It cost me $100. Then you say, "Oh really? Oh, that's, oh great." Now, you've got to be careful, because you can say, "Oh, that's a good deal." That can be bad, because that suggests that's cheap. Whereas maybe they've said that because you're supposed to be impressed and you go, "Wow, great." Doesn't matter. Whatever you do, you just say, "Wow, they're certainly great cufflinks. I really like them."
That's it. Focus on the item, not the price.
Yeah,
Great.
everything's great. Just everything's fantastic all the time. Really great cufflinks. Love that presentation. That was fantastic. Isn't the coffee brilliant? These biscuits are delicious. Everything's amazing.
Hyper positive. Yeah, it's good energy. It's good energy. So cultural no-nos, money, sex, politics, religion, and family, all these things should be avoided, certainly. And to your point about Brexit, yeah, definitely something that we should. It's funny, just from an international perspective, how much of a talking point that is. I've been in the same situation. You're from England or the UK, then you must have an opinion about Brexit. And internally, I know it's divided families and it's some pretty crunchy stuff here in the UK. For all the listeners out there, do make sure that when broaching the topic of Brexit, it may raise some hackles somewhere. Do tread lightly, do tread carefully. Moving on, we're going to talk about how to open up some networking. So we've broached the subject. We've said, isn't the coffee fantastic? But now we need to get the ball rolling with this piece of networking. Do you have any advice about how we can start to develop this conversation in terms of opening it up and building a relationship with that other individual professionally?
I suppose you can, once you've got into a sort of comfortable rhythm with the person, then, again, we have to remember that this is about professional networking.
Yeah.
So then you can start talking about something you've been working on or projects that you're doing, and just focus on that side of things. Once you've broken the ice, maybe this is a bit of a British thing, that we do like to talk about nothing for a while, just talk about nothing, and then you get down to business. And so other cultures, they might, like, that small talk doesn't really happen, and so they just get straight on with it. But in any case, once you're comfortable, you can then start to talk about work-related things.
Right.
And you can just ask people what they've been doing, if they're doing something interesting. And the focus is on whether it's interesting. You're curious. You want to know what their project is. You want to know what their company is focusing on at the moment. And it's really just a question of being curious and sort of like finding it interesting, and also trying to be helpful as well can be quite good.
Yeah. I think that's really great advice about this. Be interested. The focus is on being intrigued, being interested by something. The comments about warming up, you've got to warm up the atmosphere before jumping. I always imagine it's like you're taxiing out on the runway, and you know that before takeoff, they wind on the power a little bit just to get everything moving before they really wind on the power.
Yeah.
Before takeoff. And I think this is a really good way of thinking about networking, is that you've got to warm up a little bit before really getting down to business. Otherwise things just tend to break, or it doesn't feel as well as it could do.
That establishing that, again, that those basic foundations of trust.
Yes.
Where you've just shared a few things with each other, and then your buddies.
Yes.
A little bit.
Exactly.
And we'll always have this precious memory of that conversation about the coffee and the biscuits. This is the foundation of a beautiful relationship. And
absolutely.
then you can get into the slightly more serious stuff.
In terms of going into the serious stuff, or to keep that conversation moving in the right direction, what are your thoughts on this technique that we hear a lot about, the use of open and closed questions? We touched on it briefly over on your episode, and you mentioned this amazing word tagging, this question tagging at the end. Could you elaborate a bit more on that, about this open question, closed question scenario?
Yeah, so I'll talk about 3 types of question: tag questions, closed questions or yes or no questions, and open questions, which are probably like WH questions, right? I would say the tag questions, 2 functions really. They're not really for finding out new information. The first thing is to start a game of tennis with someone, and it's simply, a tag question is basically an invitation for the other person to just respond. And for that reason, they're great for just initiating conversation. So, this is our coffee, isn't it? This is our coffee, isn't it? Or that was interesting, wasn't it? Or God, this is a fantastic room, isn't it? Just those sorts of things. And the other if it's a fantastic room, isn't it? And the other person goes, oh yes, it certainly is. I think it's new actually. So those tag questions. We also use tag questions in another way, which is to make the other person agree with you. It's like, know, this would certainly be the best course of action, wouldn't it?
Yes.
And that's slightly more persuasive language.
Great technique. Jedi skills. Brilliant.
Because if you ask a tag question, the other person just has to say yes. I think this would be the best price, wouldn't it? Yes, it would.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Sold. Yes, sold.
Yeah, I think that 15% would be sufficient, wouldn't it? Yes. Yes, it would. Oh, damn, you did it again.
What are we agreeing to? Yes, absolutely.
So that's tag questions. So just opening up something or in a more persuasive situation. Then you've got closed questions, which are yes or no questions. And actually, although they're called closed questions, I actually find these are the more polite questions.
Yes.
And they require a little bit of an understanding that if you say, did you have to travel far? Did you have to travel far? Yeah. Obviously, the answer to that is yes, I did, or no, I didn't. But the understanding is that the other person says, yes, I did actually. It took me an hour on the overland train. Oh, really? That is fascinating. Yeah. But you start with a closed question. For example, at my lessons at school are always just a bunch of closed questions to begin with. And I just encourage my students to pair up and just ask each other some closed questions and then continue. So, did you have to travel far? Did you get here okay? Are you having a good morning? Are you having a busy week? Is this your first time here? Do you know what the lesson is about? Have you had a class with Luke before? All of them, yes or no questions. But these are more polite because they require less of the person responding. So if I say, did you get here okay? You can say, yes, I did. It was fine. Or no, it was a bit difficult, to be honest. And then it's up to you whether you give more information, which of course you should. Yeah. But the open question is actually much more direct. So instead of, did you get here okay? It would be, how was your journey? It sounds like the police. Like, where do you live? How long was your journey? Where are you from? What do you do? Where do you come from? Like, too much.
Yeah, it's an investigation, isn't it? An interrogation.
Yeah, but the police would never say, so do you often stand outside banks? Or have you ever robbed a bank before?
Lovely mask that you're wearing.
Yeah. Oh, that's a lovely mask, isn't it? Is that the mask you were wearing when you robbed the bank? No? Okay. Instead, they're like, where were you at 6:15 on Friday afternoon? And when did you come there? So anyway, closed questions tend to be a bit more polite because they put a bit less pressure on the person responding. That person responding does have to know that they then do have to give a bit more information. Open questions are when you are in a more developed position where you've developed a bit more trust and you've taken things further. And that's when you can say, so what are you working on at the moment? And when did that start? And what are the challenges in that? Right. Are you managing to, how are you dealing with that? And then you can have a much more deep conversation.
Yeah. That's great advice, world-class advice. Get the ball moving with those closed questions, short interactions, yes, no. Okay, there's an obligation on the other individual to perhaps continue. But if not, you can just build that momentum by asking those closed questions. And then when you see it as appropriate, you could potentially switch over to those open questions, just to get that conversation moving even more, to have them elaborate on certain points. That's world-class advice. Excellent. What about, we're talking about networking. You sometimes cannot select the person that you're networking with. Maybe you are the one being approached by an individual. And let's say that individual is the big cheese, the Grand Fromage for listeners within your region. The individual coming over is senior to you. Does this, or should I, change my method of communication when networking? What are your thoughts on this?
It's a bit of a tricky one because you would imagine that when the big boss comes over, Rob, it's great to meet you finally. I've heard a lot of things about you. So how's our podcasting project going? So on one hand, you think I should be very deferential to this person in authority and I should be trying to adapt my English. Now, in some languages, it's much clearer how you adapt your English in that situation. The grammar changes completely. Yes. Right? The verb forms you use are different. We don't have that in English. We don't have those clear conjugations. Yeah. So instead we use things like hedging language, or we use more polite, formal and indirect language in that situation. Yes. To show respect. Yeah. And so, it's just indirect, polite, slightly formal language in that situation. And you would imagine you have to be a bit more deferential. But at the same time, I think maybe culturally in the UK, it's okay when the boss comes over to talk to you to speak directly to the boss almost on the same level. Yes. It feels a bit scary, a bit of a risk. But sometimes you
Yes.
like get the respect of the boss when
Yeah.
you do that.
That's right, got to earn the respect. Yeah, absolutely. And to your point about walking that fine line of I've got to be deferential and polite and respectful without sounding cheeky, but you should speak directly. Speak truth to power. Great advice. I'm not sure who said that, but this idea of being direct and straight with the boss in terms of truth and honesty and what you're really trying to say, I believe is, like you said, it's a great way of establishing trust and rapport.
You don't want to come across as a little mouse. I am not worthy, master. You don't want to be like that. You want to be
Yeah,
respectful, but it's actually a great opportunity. It has to be said.
yeah,
Like when the
yeah.
boss comes to talk to you, this is actually a chance. And all of these things,
Yes.
all of these situations, you have to reframe them as opportunities. Every single interaction is like a little opportunity. And it's also a chance to sell yourself a little bit. And
Yeah, agreed.
a lot of people really don't like that idea of selling yourself, but actually it's absolutely vital. And
That's it.
you don't wait for a formal situation. You don't wait to be asked.
Yeah,
Okay, Luke, this is your chance to sell yourself. Luke, we want you to do a presentation to the boss, and this is going to be
yeah,
your chance to sell yourself. Bullet point 3, sell yourself. That it doesn't happen like that. Instead, you just get these little moments that arrive. Like you find yourself sitting next to your boss because he's decided to
yeah.
have lunch with you and your
Yes.
team, and you're like,
Yeah.
oh no, this is your chance to sell yourself
Yeah.
to him. So you can have a little bit of banter with the boss, maybe. Try and, if you make him laugh or her, make your boss laugh a little bit if it's appropriate, then that's huge gold star in a way, because they're going to have very good associations with you.
Yeah.
But also you can just talk to them straight and tell them about the work you're doing, and maybe sell yourself a little bit. That's that's a British cultural thing.
Yes.
In some other cultures, you should know your place and be very respectful.
Yeah, I really agree with you there about this selling yourself. A lot of clients we work with, they often remark, "Oh, I don't work in sales, it's very difficult." I said, well, as soon as you open your mouth, you're selling yourself. Presentation, interview, meeting, doesn't matter what, you are selling your ideas and yourself. So to a lesser or greater extent, whether you like it or not, communicating with a sales spin is always happening, especially within that business English field. So it's a great highlight.
And it doesn't have to be a hard sell. It doesn't have to be like a hard sell, which people hate.
Yes.
Instead, you just remember this. All you're doing is showing the person your work. You show them your work, because the reason you're there is they've put you there to do a certain job. And all you need to do is show them that you're doing it and show them that you're enthusiastic about it. That's it.
Yeah, 100% agree. Could not agree more with you. So you have this idea of the big guy coming over and talking to you. We've been doing it all the way through this episode and the episode over on your channel as well. There's this magic trick that we're doing all the time when we're not speaking that allows the other person to know that the lights are on and everybody's home and that you're following through. What do you think about active listening? How important is it for the individual that is not speaking and communicating at that point for that in a networking scenario? What are your thoughts on this?
Just absolutely vital. Completely.
Yeah.
The way you listen to someone is really about showing that person how you feel, what you think of them.
Yeah.
And this is what people care about, isn't it, really? They care. They feel valued when they feel like they're being listened to. And if you feel valued, you feel trusted. And again, you're in the right zone where you're building trust and you're making the other person feel valued. So it's absolutely vital to show that you're listening. And networking is not a performance. It's not just, this is my time to shine. I'm going to rabbit on at this person. It's all about the things I'm saying and the way I'm applying myself. It's often about the way you're receiving other people. And you can be like the most gracious host. You can slip into that mode where you're like making it all incredibly easy for the other person.
Yeah.
So you're just really making everything super smooth for them.
Yeah.
It's not about telling them things and applying yourself to them, charming them or manipulating them or whatever.
Yes.
But it's just about receiving them and making them feel comfortable, making them feel heard. And that's in body language, that's in the things you say. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a really pertinent point about putting the other person at ease, or at least the whole conversation is in a more relaxed environment, because without this active listening, if you're like you said, if you're just waiting for your turn to speak, then this is not, it's not, no one's really communicating at all. You're just waiting for your turn with the microphone. And this, I think, does not play by the rules of really good networking. It's not good at all.
I've just remembered something which I forgot in our last conversation, that something that flew out of my mind earlier. I've just remembered what it is, which is, and I always like doing this. It's referring to Cambridge exams.
Yes.
And the speaking tests in Cambridge exams. So in IELTS, right? It is IELTS, isn't it? Or is it Cambridge Advanced English? I can't remember if it's FCE and CAE or if it's IELTS.
Yeah.
But it's CAE and FCE. In the speaking test, you do the test with another person. So there's the examiner and then there's two people taking the test.
Yes.
And in one part of the test, you have to do a little sort of interaction with that person. So you're given a little task and the two of you have to discuss it and reach a decision together.
Sure.
And you're being tested on your ability to work together with someone else. And what the examiners are looking for is that interactive communication, which is an absolutely vital thing. And it's exactly what we're talking about. Yeah. And examiners are looking for these things. They're looking for active listening and they're looking for... So you say to your partner, so what do you think, which do you think is the best option? Yes. And your partner says, well, I think that option A is probably a good idea because it seems like it's quite an efficient way of doing things. And what the examiner is looking for then is for you to say, yes, it could be an efficient way of doing things. And also it could be cost effective, but at the same time, it might be difficult to find the materials for that. And the other person goes, finding the materials could be difficult. Basically, one person says something and the next person continues what that person has said. So that everything, so you've got one person's comment, the next person's comment, these things lock together. They join up together like train tracks or something. Yeah. You know, or like a jigsaw puzzle. They lock together. Instead of it being just like one person says something, and the other person waits, and when they finish, they say something else. Yes. Everything has to be connected, interconnected. Yeah. So it's one fluid idea being developed by two people. And so that means, continuing what someone else has said, and also paraphrasing what they've said before then developing it in a different direction.
Such a good tool. Yeah, paraphrasing. Yeah, this idea of merging those conversations together, it is being awarded in exams. You must do it. As you said, you must do it to survive your examination, but it's absolutely essential in everyday life, this merging of conversations. Like, I hear what you're saying, and I'm just going to pick up on that point and build my point upon that one, as opposed to, like we've just been saying, waiting for your turn to speak, which is just talking in sound bites.
And so that, as you said, is included in the exam for a reason, because this is a crucial skill that sort of marks your ability to use English at a certain level. Yeah, absolutely.
Great stuff. Great. So that sort of brings us to the end of that section on greasing the wheels for networking. So in there we had looking at your formality, active listening, the use of open and closed questions, and obviously paraphrasing and merging with the other individual. Great advice. So the third and final section today is about the untimely bad question, or walking yourself into a little bit of a networking nightmare, so to speak, where you may make a mistake. How could we handle these mistakes gracefully? Maybe you've asked a taboo question, for example. Your head goes one way, but your mouth says something differently, and you've landed yourself in a little bit of hot water. Is there anything or any advice you could give to the listeners today about maybe when you've overstepped the mark, or maybe taken the networking in a wrong or difficult direction?
I think what we want to do is make a big deal out of it and apologise. If we've put our foot in it and done something wrong, the natural response is to say, I'm terribly sorry. I asked you an inappropriate question and I really shouldn't have gone there. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I'm terribly sorry. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go over there and jump out of the window. Okay, that will make everything better. Instead, it might be worth just not really mentioning anything and just moving on. Just move on to something else. Just move away from the what you've done and just move on. Because flagging it up by making some big apology, that can sometimes just bring even more attention to it. if you've done something that you feel is inappropriate, or you feel like you've maybe asked an inappropriate question, or you've offended someone or whatever,
Yes.
for you might feel mortified because you feel like you've done something wrong, and suddenly you've ruined your chances of doing business
Yes.
with this person or whatever. They might not actually see it that way. Often we are hypersensitive to our own mistakes, and these things can seem like huge moments for us, but for the other person it's not such a big deal. So it's probably, unless you've made a real mistake which definitely needs an apology, like a formal apology almost. I don't know what it is I don't know what that would be. If you insulted that person's entire family, whatever. I don't know. Unless you've clearly made some huge error, then it might just be worth just glossing over it and just moving on and just saying, anyway, it might just be like oh, sorry, and then you just move on, because it's probably not as big a deal as you think it is.
Great. Yeah, fantastic advice about that. It's not as big as you think it is. And I think we often forget that in terms of, if you speak a second language, I speak other languages. And when you think about this idea of, in your head, somebody asks you a question and you are screaming, it's like, it's going crazy up here. And the other person is waiting for a response. They have no idea that everything is melting down and there's a mini mushroom cloud going off in your heads. But to the other person, they're blissfully unaware and they're just waiting for you to speak. So, like, to your point, just rolling with that energy and moving on, 9 times out of 10, you're going to get away with it, so to speak, and just recover from that very easily. Yeah, great advice.
It seems what we want to do is self-defeat sometimes, where we're in a situation we don't feel comfortable or confident, like you're speaking another language and you feel like you're out of your depth. What you want to do is flag it up and say, look, everyone, I'm sorry, my English is just not good enough here, so I just really want to apologize.
Yeah.
And you feel like you need to say that before anyone else does. But what often happens is that just other people just see you standing there self-destructing.
Yeah.
Everyone else is like, why are you doing this? You don't need to do this. It's okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
So if you've made a mistake, just make the mistake and just carry on.
Own it
just
and move on.
Leave it behind. If there's a partially completed sentence that's like lying on the floor, just never mind. Just keep going. Just leave it and go on. It happens to me all the time in English.
Definitely.
I'll be talking and I'll try and say something and I realise I've just reached a dead end grammatically.
Absolutely.
I'll just, never mind, just start again, or just break the rules. So what we often feel like in these situations is that, again, it's a performance and everything has to be correct. We focus on being correct and performing right. But instead, it might be better to have a different mindset, which is focusing, instead of focusing on absolute accuracy and correction, you focus on just getting your idea, getting your message across and making a connection with the person you're talking to. Yeah. And just focus on that. Focus on the connection, not perfection. Where have we heard that before?
Oh, yes.
Yes, all ears English.
I think that's Lindsay. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but she's right. She's absolutely right. It's a very good thing to remember, that you should focus on maintaining that connection with the person you're talking to. Don't worry about being correct, because if you... Yes. I mean, you should focus on it to an extent, of course. Yeah. But it shouldn't be the be-all, end-all, because if it is, then you're gonna get overly focused on it to the point where you start to just break down.
That's right.
Don't worry about it.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think fantastic advice. Focus on that connection. So we're rolling through a networking scenario, and then all of a sudden we have the piece of the conversation that most English speakers, like native and non-native, fear. It really terrifies them, and that is the tumbleweed, this silence. How can we deal with this? Sort of the conversation just goes off a cliff and we just can't make eye contact. We're looking around the room. Is there anything in these situations that we can do to restart that engine, get that game of tennis going again? Any lines, any phrases?
Probably not really mention it. Probably not just you're standing there and... God. You probably shouldn't say, this is awkward, isn't it? Oh dear, isn't this horrible? Probably shouldn't do that. So I don't know. You got to relax. It happens. Just relax and just be comfortable in the silence for a moment, and don't panic.
Yes.
Don't be like, football. Did you see the football? And then was like, which football? I don't know, any football. Just let's talk about football. Don't panic too much. But in terms of lines and things, I don't know. You're going to have to just go back to those closed questions, those tag questions. What do you think, Rob?
Yeah, 100% agree with you. Firstly, you own the silence. Be very comfortable with silence because it is absolutely a natural part of speech and is actually weaponized quite effectively by public speakers, just allowing the thunder of silence to roll in before they either drop a very interesting point or it's actually to position something very important. It's used quite effectively. So being in a position where you're networking and it just rolls off, allow the breath in the conversation, allow the conversation to aspirate, if you will. And then, like you said, get the closed or open questions toolkit back out and take a different line, go down a different avenue.
There's a cultural thing here as well, of course, that in some cultures silence is fine. So, yeah, I live in France. I used to live in Japan. And in Japan, they have a different relationship with silence in a social situation. It's not uncommon to have moments of silence. Mm-hmm. And I would find in my lessons these moments of silence, and I would be screaming inside like, someone speak, please! But Japanese people, it's all right. They're okay with it. It's like a different attitude to silence. In France, is a different story completely, where all you need to do is just like, sometimes you just come into a classroom and say, good morning, silence. Just wait, and 5, 4, 3, 2, and someone starts speaking. So different cultures have different relationships with silence. Some people tolerate silence more comfortably than others. So you might be in a situation where silence happens and actually everyone's fine with it. In fact, it's great. But yeah, like we've said, just relax and if there's a moment of silence, just let it happen. It can be quite nice in a way sometimes.
Yeah, just allowing it to breathe. So maybe along the same subject here is the silence or the awkward question and all these other things that are fairly difficult to handle in this networking scenario. The final one that I'd like to talk about today is a polite exit. Maybe the wife is calling, or maybe the bus is coming, or you've got to make the commute, or whatever it is. How do you politely close down a conversation that either isn't going anywhere or you need to get out of that situation without making the other person feel bad?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Sometimes you have to keep one eye open for the opportunity to escape.
Yes.
If that's what you're trying to do, if you're trying to escape, you got to look for other people, and you might need to say, oh, sorry, I just need to go and speak to da-da-da for a moment. Yeah. And then you often go and speak to your friend. He's like, oh, thanks for rescuing me from that. It was a nightmare. Or if that doesn't happen, you'll have to say, look, it was really great talking to you. Again, try and be positive and try and summarize a little bit. It was really great talking to you. I thought it was really interesting what you said about da-da-da. And we must, maybe open the door for more options in the future. We really must talk again sometime. And do you have a business card, or are you on LinkedIn? How shall I find you? Da-da-da. Great. Okay. I'll check out that thing you mentioned, but I'd better be going now. But it was great to talk to you. And then, right, thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Gone. Yes.
Something like that. I'd better be off now. I really must be going. It's been great meeting you. It's been great talking to you. It's interesting that we say it's nice to meet you at the start, and then we say it was nice meeting you at the end.
Yeah, that's interesting.
If someone else has to go, you're talking to the person and they have to leave, you make it easier for them. Yes. They say, oh, look, I've really better be off. And you say, yeah, okay, fine, sure. It was really great talking to you. Yes. Nice meeting you. You let them go if people need to, and people will respect you for that.
Yeah, I think this politeness is very key. Thanking somebody from the time, expressing gratitude in some way, and then literally giving your reasons and leaving. It doesn't need to be a painful affair of this extended car crash of, oh, I'm going to go now. Oh, okay then. And sort of
better go then. Like a Hugh Grant situation. And half an hour later, so, oh, anyway, would you like to get married or no? Oh, too awkward. Classic. Yeah. And then the other extreme is Alan Partridge. Yes. Who would say, sorry, do you mind if I just stop talking to you and just go and stand over there? Which obviously you shouldn't do either.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
as you said, just like giving your reasons and saying something nice and just mentioning that you could contact them again in the future at some point, and then off you go. Yeah.
Excellent. So in that section, we had about managing mistakes within networking, taboo questions, silence, and polite exits. So that was excellent. Luke, I just want to express my supreme gratitude for gracing us with your knowledge bombs today. Some absolute world-class advice being deployed there. So thank you for that. If they don't know where to find your podcast and your excellent material, where can they find you?
I guess they could just use their podcast app of choice and search for Luke's English Podcast, which, I mean, I don't know how my podcast has become well known when it's got a name like that, because first of all, no one knows how to spell Luke. Yeah, they don't. It's Luck. It's Luck. People are always calling me Luck, Mr. Luck, Luck this, Luck that.
Excellent.
But Luke apostrophe S, Luke's English Podcast. I'm assuming everyone knows how to spell podcast.
Yes. Yeah.
Luke's English Podcast in your podcast app of choice. Otherwise, my website, where you can just find all the information you could possibly want to know. And that's teacherluke.co.uk. And then also YouTube, Luke's English Podcast. Just search for Luke's English Podcast and you'll find me.
Great. Excellent. Thanks once again for joining me today. It's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for inviting me. And I've enjoyed talking about this subject and the subject of business English, which we can see is not dry. It's a fascinating topic, and there's a lot of social dynamics involved in business English, a lot of psychology.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating subject. I've enjoyed teaching business English throughout my career. I don't do much of it on my podcast. It's a great idea of yours to do a business English podcast. So I think everyone must be gaining a lot from these episodes. So good idea.
Appreciate your time. We'll do it again sometime. Appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you, Rob.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
So there we have it, an absolutely incredible episode with Luke from Luke's English Podcast. Remember to go and check out the first part of that episode over on Luke's channel. I will drop the link in the description. So that just leaves me to say thank you for joining me on the Business English Podcast. Stay hungry, keep practicing, and of course, keep it strictly business. You have been listening to the Business English Podcast. Remember to subscribe, leave a review, and we'll see you next time.